Hey, Tim Schetz here for C4D Training. It's been a while, so a belated Happy New Year to everybody. Things been a little busy around here, so I apologize. This is the first opportunity I've had to get out a new tutorial. So let's get going. I've had a few people ask me how to do kind of a sweep nurb or something like that, where you might have an arrow at the end. So you have this kind of sweeping arrow that goes across your screen. And so I'm going to show you a couple of solutions here real quick. Some of them better than others, and I'll explain why. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a spline. So I'm going to select my Bezier, and I'm just going to maybe go to the front view here, and I'll just kind of draw some lines here. There we go. Not great, but it'll do. Okay. And I'm going to switch back to my perspective view here. And I'm going to make a circle. I'm going to scale that guy down a little bit. Don't want him to be too big. And I'm going to throw those two things into a sweep nurb. Okay. So come down here to sweep nurb. And I'll throw those guys in. And there we go. There's a sweep nurb. And if I take my sweep nurb, I can animate the end growth, right? So there we go. Gotta make the sound effects. Okay. And now I want to attach an arrow to the end of this so that it goes along with the sweep nurb. So I'm going to use, I don't know, since we're using a round sweep nurb, I'll use a cone. Okay. And I want to make sure that the bottom of the cone is the part that's aligned to the end here. So I'm going to go ahead and make my cone editable. So with my cone selected, I'm going to go up here to Structure, Axis Center, Axis Center. Make sure that Auto Update and Editor Update are selected. Then I'm going to make sure that my axis goes all the way to the bottom here. So that's -100 on the Y, so all the way down. And close that. So now to my cone, I'm going to add a tag, and I'm going to add an Align to Spline tag. And if I select my Align to Spline tag, I have this spline path option here. And I'm going to drag the spline into that box. So now my cone is aligned to that spline. So if I take my Align to Spline and position, I move that all the way along. There we go. And now it's at the end. And I can hit tangential. So notice if I bring this along, see how it stays pointed in one direction. If I change that, then it kind of moves, it turns as it moves along. But now it's sort of facing the wrong direction. So what I can do to fix that, a couple things. I can actually rotate the axis for my pyramid and move it up to 90 degrees, and so now it's facing the right way. And now if I take my Align to Spline and I do this, see how it follows the spline. Okay, so far so good, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate this. I have 90 frames here, so I'm going to animate this over 90 frames. So at the beginning of my 90 frames, I'm going to set my position for my cone at 0 because I wanted it at the beginning. I'm going to go ahead and animate that. And then I'm going to come down here to the end, and I'm going to change that to 100%, and I will animate that again. So I'm going to do the same thing with my sweep nurb. I'm going to come down here to the beginning, and for my end growth here, I'm going to go ahead and set that to 0 and animate it. Set a keyframe, come down to 90, and change that to 100%. And keyframe that. And so now, as I scrub through, it sort of follows, but see the problem here? Look at that. And as we go along, it sort of separates from the sweep nurb. And if I rotate this around and kind of get it more into view here, you can see it starts off it starts pretty early. So here it already is separating, and then it separates more, and then as we get closer to the end, it joins back up with the sweep nurb. But there's that little gap there. So we could go through and we could edit it, and we could say, okay, at this point, I want the align to spline to not be at 61.572%. I want it to be, less. So I want it to be there. And I could keyframe that. And, well, that solves part of the problem, but then it creates other problems, see? So it pokes through there. So this way doesn't work so well. Well, the guy over at base 80 has set up some Xpresso to do this, and I'm going to just show you kind of what he put together. So instead of the align to spline tag, I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to go ahead and right click on my cone, go to C4D tags, and come down to Xpresso and add an Xpresso tag, and it automatically opens up our Xpresso window. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so I can fit it in here, and so that we can still see what's going on here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is set up some Xpresso here. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull in our spline. I'll make that a little bit bigger so we can see it. And I got to pull in my cone because my cone's going to be doing something in here as well. There's my cone. And to my spline, so we have the input ports and the output ports here. Okay. So to my output port, I'm going to go ahead and add an object port. And that's basically just the information for the object. And on my cone, I'm going to add some input ports. And I'm going to go to coordinates, position, because I want to affect its position. And I'm going to want to affect its rotation, because I'm going to want it to kind of, follow along that path, right? I don't want it to be pointing in one direction, just sliding along. I want it to kind of follow and turn as the spline turns. So I'm going to go ahead and add a coordinate rotation port as well. Okay. So now we got to add some things in between here to tie them together. And notice, look down here in this little gray area. When I mouse over one of the ports, it tells me what it is. So this is an instance output. Okay. And if I mouse over the position, it says vector, and rotation says vector. So we can't take an instance and tie it to a position or a rotation. So we have to kind of convert that. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to add a new node and Xpresso general. And so I'm going to move this up so we can see this. And then we're going to come in here and add a new node, Xpresso general. I'm going to add a spline node. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead, my object and offset, that's good. And I can tie my object right to my object. On this side, I'm going to add a port for tangent. So let's move these guys over. So we're going to start to run out of room here. So I can actually take the position from this and tie it right to the position of this. As I scrub this, you can see nothing's happening right now. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to select my spline node. And when I come in here, I'm going to select this Use Uniform Distribution. I actually have to animate my offset. So again, at the beginning, I'm going to set that to 0. And I'm going to run that up there and go to 100% and click on that. And so now as I scrub this, you'll see that it actually follows the sweep nurb very closely, but again, we have the problem of it facing only one direction as it does it, and so it looks a little weird. So we're going to fix that. And the way we're going to fix that is with this tangent. So we're going to add a couple more things here. So I'm going to go and I'm going to add a new node, Xpresso, calculate, and we want vector to matrix. And if I mouse over this tangent, you'll see that it says down here, when I mouse over, watch down here, it says vector. So we're going to take that tangent, we're going to grab it and take it to the input of this vector to matrix node. Okay. And then I'm going to add another node, and under calculate, and I'm going to do matrix to HPB. Now the HPB, when we look at the rotation here, we have HPB. So what we're doing is we're taking this information and we're converting it to the HPB information to send to the rotation. But I'm not going to send individual ones out, so I'm going to add another node here, which is the only one left for this, and that's vector. And then I'm going to take my vector, connect it to my rotation, take the output from the vector to matrix, and take it over to the matrix. And so now, when I animate this, my cone goes right along with the sweep nurb. And there's no gap in it, there's no problems, it looks great. Okay. So this is the setup that Base 80 put together. And so I'm just kind of showing you guys that. I didn't come up with this, that was all him. I'm just kind of showing it to you so you can see how that works. And then sometimes I like to play around with Xpresso, and I know that kind of makes me sick, but that's just the way I am. So let's say that we want the end of this to kind of follow along. We don't want it to leave that long trail. As the arrow comes along, maybe when we get to about here, the tail starts to follow along and just kind of starts to disappear. So how do we go about doing that? Well, let me show you that real quick. So the way that I'll do that is I'm going to go ahead and move this down. Not sure how many of you have had a lot of exposure to Espresso, but the window in here operates just like when you're modeling. If you hold down the Alt or Option key and push the middle mouse wheel, you can drag the window around. The middle mouse wheel zooms in and out, so you can zoom out and move stuff around and then add more pieces in here. The window's really big. You can just kind of keep going and going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull in my sweep nurb object and make this guy a little bigger. And let's maybe zoom in here a little bit. Bring him over here. And I actually need 2 copies of my sweep nurb. So I'm going to go ahead and drag another copy in over here and make him a little bit bigger as well. And on this one, this will be my start, I'm going to actually add object property and then end growth. And on this one, I'm actually going to add object properties, and I'm going to go to start growth way down here. Okay. And then in between them, I want a calculation, because I want to, whatever the end growth is, I want to subtract a little bit for the start growth so that it follows a certain amount behind. And so to do that, I'm going to add a new node, Xpresso. I'm going to add a calculate node, come down here to math. And by default, math is set to add, and I want to actually change that here to subtract. And I'm going to put my output 2 to 0.3. So 0.3 would be 30% with the way the numbers work here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my end growth and I'm going to tie that in to the first input. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking my end growth and I'm subtracting 0.3 from whatever that value is, and then outputting that value out to the start growth. So if end growth is 70% and I subtract 30%, then the output here would be 40%. And so as the end growth changes, the start growth will change too, but it'll be like 30% behind it. Okay, and so I'll show you kind of what that looks like. So I'm gonna move this out of the way. And so as I go, we get to a certain place, and then all of a sudden the tail starts to follow. Okay, and you got to do the sound effects. So whoosh, there we go. Okay, So just kind of adding a little bit to what base 80 did to kind of make it, kind of interesting. And I'm going to try something here. Let's see, I'm going to make my Xpresso window a little bit bigger so I can see all of this. And I'm going to go ahead and I want to try something. I have this offset here on my spline, and I'm wondering, let's see, if I take my sweep nurb and I bring it in here, and I add my object property, and I go to my end growth, if I can take my end growth and turn it to my offset there, and so if I select my spline, I no longer have an offset option, which I had animated, and let's just see what happens. Same sort of thing. Okay, so what did I just do? If I delete this sweep nurb from here and I select my spline node, I had animated my offset to go from 0 to 100% over the 90 frames. Well, my end growth is doing exactly the same thing, so why animate two things and maybe get something screwed up? Let's just run everything off of one output. So by dragging my sweep nurb back in here and adding an output port for my object property and growth, this is going from 0 to 100% over the duration of our animation. And it's exactly what we had the offset doing here manually. We had to animate that. So by tying this into that offset, now I don't have to animate that. So if I were to change my end growth, everything would automatically change. I don't have to go back and reanimate. So, and that's the beauty of Xpresso, is having things tied together so that you don't have to keep animating. And so if I go ahead and minimize this and we do our animation here, there we go. So everything follows everything else. So it's kind of nice. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you found this helpful. Big thank you to Base 80 for the original Xpresso. And I just kind of wanted to show you guys how to do that, and then maybe how to kind of add on to it and just kind of play around in Xpresso a little bit. I'm going to be doing a second part to this tutorial, showing you how to do the same thing, except using a spline wrap instead of a sweep nurb. So stay tuned, and as always, thanks for watching. I'm Tim Schetz, C4D Training. Take care.